Hey, what's up? This is Jake here in Jake's shop. Thought it'd be time to go ahead and do another update on the car. This is going to be a quick little video, mainly on wet sanding and what I've learned about wet sanding. In previous videos, I got this car finally down to 220, blocked it all out with long boards, down to 220. So this is just the final wet sand just before paint. I've learned a couple things through this process here. I'm going to go ahead and show you what I've learned about block sanding and wet sanding. You know, I was really hesitant at first to even bother try wet sanding. It's one of those things where I hadn't done a lot of it and I just wasn't really comfortable with it. You know, a lot of guys will say you can go ahead and use dry sand 400. There's a lot of different information out there as far as the type of product you're going to use for sealer and how much that'll fill in the sand scratches. I tried dry sanding at first, and I'll show you what it did to me and why I'm liking wet sanding so much now. So we'll flip the camera around, we'll zoom in, I'll go through my process of what I've been doing to this car. Okay, so I don't know if it's going to show it or not, but I'll go through the process here, zoomed in a little bit of what I've been doing, and then we'll zoom in and I'll show you how this product's working for me. So I've mentioned it before, this dry coat's really handy. It lasts forever, it's not cheap, but it's a 3M dry guide coat, and I'm still using it for every step of this project as far as coating it and then blocking it, coating it and blocking it. It applies really fast. It's obviously dry. It's some sort of, I've said it in other videos, it must be some sort of carbon or something in here. It's working great. So like I had done before, I'm going ahead and putting this on. You know, what this does is it just darkens it just slightly. And what it's actually doing, it's getting inside those sand scratches. So anything that remains after wet sanding, as I'm going through, it's actually still sticking in the cracks just slightly to where I know to keep going with a little bit more movement. So we'll go ahead and do this first. Try to keep it dry. I've been wet sanding over here and going through the process of here. So here's my door. I've got the roof done and everything else. I'm going ahead, when you wet sand, you'll hear this a lot online. There's a lot of good information out there. Obviously tons of ways to do things. Dry sanding to 400 is a thing. Guys do that. The sealer even says you can do that. When it comes to wet sanding, you know, you're keeping those granules in the paper a lot sharper, a lot longer. So it's almost like you're always using a new piece of paper for the most part. When you wet sand, you want to stick with a slightly higher grit. I could probably wet sand with 400 and it would work for my sealer, but I'm going to go ahead and go to 500 just because I have it. You want to make sure you get a wet dry paper, otherwise the paper will fall apart. For the most part, I'm using this block right here. You know, you can actually use your hands a little bit. You got to be careful with that. I'd rather use a block. It's slightly flexible, but it stays fairly flat. That's most of the flat work out here. The inner panels and around the wheel wells, I'm actually using a very, very soft block. It's a motor guard block as well. But it's just super flexible. I've kind of showed that in other videos. It's got a softer layer and a little bit harder layer, but it's still really flexible. So I'll put a piece of sandpaper on this, and I'll go inside the wheel wells and the cracks and stuff, and you know, little teeny valleys and different things on the car. So anyways, we'll go ahead and do a little block in here with the motor guard, and I'm just going to do this live. It actually goes a lot quicker. You know, it's kind of the same basic principles when you're doing regular block sanding, other than it just kind of goes fairly quick. I've been using this piece of paper already. Oh, the other thing is soak the paper. You know, I was soaking it, whatever, 20 minutes. Probably go less than that. It just helps it form a little better, and then it kind of holds a little more moisture. Now, there's a couple ways to kind of keep the car wet. You know, that was my first impressions when going to wet sand. It's like, how do I keep it wet? I'm going to have water on my shop. What do I do? I've seen guys use spritz bottles. Those work. Another little trick is you just grab a 2-liter or 1-liter bottle, old Palo Pop or whatever, drill a little teeny hole in the lid of it, and you can use it as a spritz bottle. I've been using that, and you can also use sponges. So I've noticed that the side panels are taking a lot more water because it's just rinsing down a lot more. The flat panels, or the horizontal panels on the roof and the rear deck lid, those are a little bit nicer. But it's kind of a feel thing, how much water you want, right? Because as you go, I'll go ahead and start doing this here. You can see it's kind of getting gummy, you know, and then I kind of rinse it a little. And I'm still using my basic principles for block sanding as well, going in that X pattern and rinsing it. And as you rinse it, you'll see, I don't think you're going to see that in the camera. I'm going to turn around and zoom in, but I've already cut through to no sanding scratches in this area. I've still got some sand scratches in this area. So I'm going to flip the camera around, zoom in real close, and I'll show you that. But let me go ahead and finish the bulk of this panel. You can kind of see it in real time. You know, it goes pretty quick. You can kind of feel it in the paper as it starts to get sticky. At least for me, that means it's time for a little more water. You know, the goal is to keep that sandpaper nice and clean. Obviously, this is a mess. It takes a lot of time it doesn't take that much time, but it's just gonna create a big mess in your shop. So I go through here and just kind of wash the panel, you know, work the panel back. And I can see sand scratches that are still deep. And as I see those, I just work those areas. And I want to retain long strokes as all possible. I got a body line in this door right here, so when I take the block off, I'm not rolling it over the body panel. I'm just taking it kind of slightly over, and it's overhanging on this underside, like if I was coming up here, that overhangs on that side. Usually I have the radio going, and it really helps me out. Kind of rocking in the background, almost gonna get zoned out, enjoying the zen time in the shop. And then you can see that obviously the guide coat's getting washed away, but not all of it. I mean, it actually, believe it or not, still stays in these cracks. I mean, I'm hitting this area with water here, and you're gonna see where that guide coat's still stuck in the cracks right here when I zoom it in. I'll do the bottom panel in the same fashion. You can see I had a little bit more wet sanding there. I'm gonna go ahead and pop the camera off. Okay, now we got autofocus. There you go. See those scratches? That's all wet. That's where I sanded. That's where I sanded that already. So those are showing me just a little bit more, and it's not gonna take much more. Here's another little area. Right there. Just a little bit more. You know, that wet sanding works great. That's really works good for... So, you know, the shop actually retains to be a mess. What I also like about wet sanding, besides really the downside is really just the mess. The water in your shop or whatever. You know, I don't want to keep the panels super wet. You probably can for the most part, but if you cut through to bare metal on little corners or something, that's not the end of the world, other than I don't like the idea of it being wet. So I've been using a ton of these blue towels. So when you towel it off, what I've noticed is it kind of helps you see even more, you know, just in case you've missed anything. You know, you kind of take that mud off and you look and you're like, oh geez, okay. You know, you can really see the sanding scratch. You're like, okay, well, it just needs a little bit more. And again, this didn't even wipe off. That guide coat's still inside those cracks, just a little bit. So I'm able to see them a lot more. The other thing that's nice, you know, whenever you're doing your final, every time you go over the car and you're wiping it or cleaning it, you're always just looking for imperfections that you missed. When I did the roof blocked out beautifully to 220, no low spots, no major issues at all as far as that's concerned. But I did find one pinhole, one little pinhole, and I actually talked to my buddy Fred. He was in another video over here. He actually helped me out with the roof a little bit because I was chasing a little bit of a low spot with too much filler. And being a professional, he just came over here and helped me take care of it, taught me a few things about blocking. But yeah, see, those are gone now. The sand scratches are absolutely gone. That's it. I mean, basically, you could do the whole car that way. I bet you'll probably have about 4 or 5 hours into blocking this, wet sanding it before it's all said and done. So not horrible compared to the 3 other coats of primer and everything else that I've already done. But what I was saying on that pinhole, I just used a little dolphin glaze and took a razor and then filled it just with a little bit of dolphin glaze. I mean, it was a pinhole smaller than a tip of a pin and just barely low. Took a little dolphin glaze, you know, scratched it just a little bit with the X-Acto knife, took a little dolphin glaze and took a razor blade very carefully and filled that hole. And then what I'm gonna go do after that sets up and dries, I'm just gonna wet sand it. It's done. So as you're going through projects, you know, little things like that, a lot of the key to the best guys in the world that do this stuff all the time is they know how to fix things on the fly. They know how to constantly watch for those imperfections. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and show you what dry sanding does with 500 versus wet sanding. I forgot to do that earlier, so I'm gonna cut this portion of it into those other clips I just shot. But So basically, like I was saying, wet sanding, I'm gonna go ahead and do a little bit of the bottom of this panel now. Just kind of get it, you know, make sure it's wet, make sure that block is sliding through there. I can see right here, I knew that happened. It's gonna sand out just fine, but when I was priming it, I just barely touched it with my sweater was hanging down like an idiot. Oh yeah, it's gonna come right out. So anyways, you can see I'm blocking this panel quite a bit. You know, like I said, when I come up to that corner, this body line, I'm keeping the block flat off of it, you know, keeping it flat off of it. When it comes to finally touching that edge up, I'll just barely roll it over, almost no weight at all. I'm not trying to really deaden that line, I'm just trying to make it smooth so there's no sanding scratches in it. You just barely roll it over it, not even, just the weight, almost the weight of the block. You know, and when you're wet sanding, when you're sanding in general on this level, you're not pushing into the panel at all. It's just a light touch. You're mainly just holding the block, very light pressure. And that side has just no sanding scratches. So what we'll do is go ahead and do a little dry sanding. We'll grab a piece of paper. Okay, so I found a dry block and some dry paper. And this is just for demonstration purposes. And the reason I'm wet sanding. You know, besides the dust in general that you have to wear a mask and mess around with, this is the reason. The finer grit the sandpaper, the quicker it clogs. So you're constantly trying to fight that battle. Now, this is a little dry section here, so I'm gonna go ahead and just do a little bit here. Now, initially it cuts great, and it will cut great at first, but you're gonna fight this constantly. I mean, it just loads up so fast. You're gonna burn through a lot more sandpaper. It's gonna take longer. Wet sanding is actually saving me a lot of time and materials. So that's the reason I went with it. Yeah, my shop's a mess, but that's okay, it'll dry up. I've got good airflow, some heat in here. I'll wipe the panels off, and I'm willing to live with the mess. Keeps the dust down, keeps the dust from getting in all the cracks and crevices. Because after this, the car gets cleaned, and re-cleaned, and then remasked before I paint. Okay, so I mentioned it earlier in the video, but here's what we've got. Where that piece of green tape is where after wet sanding, you know, this roof's been wet sanded. You can see the shine even off the light and the reflection of light on just the primer alone. You know, it's really hard to actually visually see any sort of sand scratches. Anything that you can see in this is going to be easily filled with the sealer coat. But you know, I just used, here we'll go here, I just used this Euroglaze, Euroglaze. You know, there's a bunch of different brands and products out there. They're not paying me to say this or anything, but that's what a lot of the car guys end up using to deal with little issues like this. Trying to get up on top of this thing so you can actually see it. I haven't sanded it yet, but see that little bright, there it is, that bright little hole? That's all I filled. I'm just gonna wet sand that smooth and it'll be done. I put the tape there so I could find it. It's so hard to see, you know, when I was on top of this car, you know, the whole back half's all been wet sanded. Everything, you can see the shine on that sucker. Going over and over and over and look for any sort of sanding scratches, because that's the last thing I want coming through this dark paint. You can see I've already went ahead and I've got most of the car all guide coated, so I can just finish wet sanding the rest of this car today. Took a couple days off work. I want to go ahead and shoot some paint on this thing soon. This should look a lot different here soon. Hey, if you like this video at all, we'll keep doing more updates on the Camaro. Maybe shoot some paint here soon and go from there. Thanks for watching.